Hello everyone, my name is Anne Jenkin Levanway and I'm a doctoral student in the OLPD department of the College of Education and Human Development. Today I'm going to be talking about uncovering Minnesota's gifted education discrepancies, a policy analysis. Gifted education is a type of programming that supports exceptional students with advanced abilities. Participating in gifted education programs has been demonstrated to show improved high school graduation rates, stronger higher education persistence, and creating space for community and organizational leaders. Unfortunately, across the United States and here specifically in Minnesota, students of color and Indigenous students are vastly underrepresented by these programs. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, 7.2% of all white students are identified in gifted, but that's not true of all other races of students. So for Black students, only 6% of all students are represented, 5.8% of multiracial students, 4.7% of Hispanic students, 4.6% of Pacific Islander students, and 2.5% of Native Alaskan or American Indian students have been identified. The one exception to this pattern is that of Asian students, who are represented at a rate of 4.9%. So there's clearly an issue in how we go about identifying and supporting students of color and Indigenous students here in Minnesota. Research tells us that there are three main causes for this ongoing discrepancy. The first one is a lack of federal legislation and inadequate state-level legislation. Presently, we do not have a federal-level policy that governs or supports gifted education, so it's left to states. Minnesota does have one, but it's missing a lot of important pieces. Another route to this is the bias identification methods and timeline, which a lot of researchers have found, and it continues to be a really important hot topic in gifted education research. The third route is the lack of teachers of color, which several researchers have looked at broadly. Here in Minnesota, according to the Minnesota Department of Education, nearly 96% of our practicing educators are white. So there's a strong research base to show us why this looks this way, but the focus of my policy analysis is looking at alternatives. So I came up with 5 policy alternatives. Policy A is a regulatory policy that would amend the current state-level mandate. It would include things like not only identifying students, but requiring support and ensuring that teachers get adequate training, which they're not required to have now. Policy B would be redistributive. This would shift the responsibility for identifying and supporting gifted students from individual school districts to the Minnesota Department of Education. Policy C is a distributive process that would address the lack of teacher diversity in Minnesota. So this would be a big systems capacity shift that would probably take a lot of time, but is an increasingly important thing for not only gifted education, but for all parts of our education in Minnesota. Policy D is regulatory and redistributive. This would combine amending our current policy and the responsibility shift to MDE. Finally, Policy E is regulatory, redistributive, and distributive. This would combine the policy amendment to update our current state-level policy. It would include the responsibility shift, and it would also include improving racial representations in Minnesota teachers. So it would be a combination of policy alternatives A, B, and C. Upon doing a policy analysis that looked at technical feasibility, political feasibility, and administrative feasibility, my policy recommendation is Policy A. It came out to have moderate technical feasibility, high political feasibility, and high administrative feasibility. Because it wouldn't really be changing any of their responsibilities and would simply update our current policy, it's most likely to get passed and to actually be able to function in better representing BIPOC students in gifted education. Clearly, we need some more research and some added policy influence from decision makers, but I'm excited to see where this might lead for future research. Thanks.